Welcome everybody. As Rob pointed out, my name is Anthony Russomanno. I'm actually with the Princeton Review and have been teaching with them for over 17 years. I teach SAT and ACT. I've trained for other exams. I also work in partnerships for the company, but I've been tutoring kids for the last 17 years. So some housekeeping on my side of things. On this slide here, you can read my background. I will also make my slides available when this is all over. Rob will send out a follow-up email with these slides, so don't feel like, oh, I've got to write some stuff down. You'll be able to access them at a later time. But if you need to get in touch with me after this presentation, my email and my phone number are right on this slide. So my email is anthonyr@review.com, and my phone number is right there as well. So if you have additional questions, you want to reach out to me, whether it's about Princeton Review, about anything I've said tonight, about the ACT or even the SAT, feel free to contact me. So with that said, I kind of want to take you into kind of our agenda for tonight. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the misconceptions about the ACT and testing. I'll give you some tips and strategies about the ACT. I'll talk a little bit about the Princeton Review and our timeline, and then, as Rob pointed out, we'll open up for Q&A. I go through pretty quickly. This isn't meant for the ACT session that gets you 10 more points on the ACT. It's kind of meant as a precursor or for your prep needs to kind of decide, oh, well, I need to be thinking about this. So tonight I want to shed some light on the entire ACT, kind of alleviate any frustrations you might have if you've already taken it, and then talk to you a little bit about studying and how you can improve your scores, and as I mentioned, give you some tips and strategies along the way. So that's kind of what I want to do with this session tonight, and just kind of open up your thinking. Too many times, I do a lot of these seminars, and a lot of it is to educate not just the students but also the parents. So hopefully we have some parents tonight. But I hear this a lot. My kids, or I'm a great student in high school. I have a 4.7564 GPA. I've got all these honors exams. I wrote a book. I've got all these extracurricular activities, but my ACT score is so low, and I don't get it. And so what I'm going to talk to you about tonight is why that happens and how you can approach, whether it's the ACT or even the SAT, so you can be better prepared for that. So that's kind of the agenda for tonight. So let's kind of get into it now. I'm not going to break down the test. I have some slides on it, but you guys can look this up. You can go to princeton.com, act.org, and you can see what sections are on it, how it's broken down, how it's scored out of 36, what are the average scores. So you can look all this up, as well as what's in each section. I want to spend more of my time on the strategies and the tips. So here's the English section and the math. There's 60 questions, 60 minutes. You can look all this stuff up. So again, and I will provide you with these slides so you can have them at your fingertips. But let's kind of talk about the misconceptions about it. And so some of the misconceptions are that this test measures your intelligence, how smart you are. I know that's what I thought when I was in high school. If you have a really good GPA, you're going to ace this exam. You can increase your scores. If I have a great test score, then I'm going to win. I'm going to get into the school I want. And then also sometimes people think scores are becoming less important. And some of these things can be further from the truth. So what does the test really measure? And really all it measures is how well you take the ACT. Now there is some math on it and some reading on it, but really ultimately what it comes down to is how well you take this exam. So some of the truths are, and first understand, you shouldn't take your test scores too personally, okay? I know when I was in high school, I go, oh, I felt really bad about myself, but I didn't know about the SAT or the ACT back then, and some of the things that they put you under when you're trying to take the test. So don't take them personally. Understand that there are some things you can do to get ready for this exam, and that's what you need to do. And if you don't, then you shouldn't be complaining about your score, because you can coach. As you see, a proper coaching can increase your score. I've seen it. I've helped students. it doesn't necessarily increase your intelligence, but it increases how you approach the exam, or how much better you can do that. So it doesn't measure your intelligence. Your GPA is still the most important thing in admissions, so the classes you take in your curriculum. Scores are only one piece of the puzzle. Yet the test scores are still heavily relied on, especially at those large universities that get so many applications, whether they get 40, 50,000 applications. They've got to be able to weed some students out, and sometimes those test scores will do that for them. So I also wanted to put it in perspective again. It's just one piece of the puzzle. These test scores, these standardized test scores, are just one piece of it. There's so many more things that go into it. So don't get hung up on this. But at the same time, too, don't think, well, shoot, my GPA is so good that they won't even look at my test scores. And that's not always the case as well. Okay, so I'm going to talk about 5 things tonight that are going to help you succeed on the ACT or even the SAT. So there's 5 things on these multiple choice standardized exams that I'm going to help you kind of walk through. And this is kind of my teaser slide. And I'll fill in these blanks as we kind of move along. So first things first, one of the first tips that I like to talk about, and if you've been to my SAT section, it's very similar because there's a lot of similarities between these exams. So if you've heard this before, then maybe this is just a reiteration and it's going to help you. If you haven't heard before, then great. The first strategy and the tip is knowing thy enemy. And the enemy here, it's not Princeton Review because we help you get better scores. It's the people who write the exams. On the SAT, the ETS writes it. On the ACT, you got the ACT kind of creating the exam. And the more we know about them and how they construct the exam is going to help us take the test. Okay, so that means you need to know what content is covered. For example, oh, should I study calculus? Well, you don't need to study calculus because it's not on the ACT or on the SAT. But some people go, well, I'm in calculus now. I'm going to study hard because it's going to help me for my exam. And it's not going to help you for exam. So that's important to know what's content, as well as the format. How's the scoring work, the point system, how, where are the easy questions, where are the hard questions, can I find them out? So that's really important, and I'll kind of show you what I mean by that. But before I do that, why do we take this test really is really important as well as we understand these test writers. Well, one, you take it because it's part of the admissions package. You got to do that to apply to a particular school. Now, you can do the SAT or the ACT. You don't have to do both. And then it's another way for colleges to compare students. So if you're from California versus somebody from Texas or somebody from New Jersey, they have to find a way to compare students because beyond your GPA and your grades and stuff, they want something else. But really, the other underlying part is it's a moneymaker for ACT, just as the SAT is a moneymaker for ETS, and the College Board. So it's really important that you know that it's not just about seeing how smart I am, because that's what I thought. It's a moneymaker. They want you to take the test multiple times. That's how they make more money. They want you to buy their study material. Now, obviously, we make a business off of it because Princeton Review helps students prepare for it. But we also believe there are better instruments or better a test can be made better to kind of really test what you know and your knowledge. Now, GPA is still the best predictor of your college success, so just remember that. So when you take your ACT, they kind of get this bell curve going because they want people to kind of fall in the middle, so you'll retake it. Because if everybody scored high, nobody would retake it. If everyone scored low, people would go, well, I'm not going to college. I'm not cut out for this. So most people score in the middle. And that's why you see a lot of even very good students scoring in the middle and not as high as they thought because they're just not used to this type of test. So why do students typically struggle with an ACT? Well, number one is it's not designed so you can finish like your high school tests are. You know, your high school teachers, they want you to finish and they want to test what you know. Well, on the ACT, it's sometimes a little tricky. There's some errors in there. It's under really big time constraints. Even on the science section on the ACT, you don't really need the science. You just got to be able to understand what you're looking for and how to do it. But in high school, for science, you need to know science, whether it's physics, bio, or chem. And then math, it covers on the ACT many, many years of math, when in high school you're just testing in that 1 year, whether it's algebra or geometry. So it covers a lot of years over that. So that's why a lot of students might struggle on it. So we're going to do a little game right now, and it's kind of this word association game that helps us get into the mindset of the people who write the exam. So I'm going to say a word. Now, if you've already participated, don't be cute with your answers here. But I'm going to say a word, or I'm going to show it on the screen, and what I'd love for you to do is chat it in, and then Rob is going to kind of give me out and shout out what he kind of hears or sees, what you're chatting in. So here's the first word. So whatever first word that comes to your mind when you see it here. Peanut butter.
Jelly, 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 food, food, jelly, 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 jam, jelly, jelly, sandwich, jelly, jelly, bread.
All right. All right, here's the next word, everybody. It's going to be another one. Boy.
Girl, 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 girl. Man, mom, girl, 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 boyfriend, male, blue, girl, 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 relationship.
All right, and then now this time I want you to think of a number, any number.
13, 2, 9, 3, 14, 7, 0, 21, 27, 8, 3, 10, 5, 23, 0.34, 2, 3, 13, 12, 18, 3.
Great. Okay, so now I just met you guys, or I made these slides before the presentation, and um, I said jelly or bread and girl, and most of you are chatting those in. Now, it's not a bad thing if you said jelly and you said girl, but what it does show is we're very predictable animals here, and that if I know you're going to say this, well, then the people who write the exam, whether it's the SAT or the ACT or the subject test, they know what you're going to say as well. And sometimes they can use it against you. And I'll show you as we kind of maybe do some problems a little bit later. But I want you to understand that there is some predictability, and the people who write the exams, they're not college professors. They're professional test writers, and they need to have a nice normal distribution. So they actually help people miss questions by using these predictability within each of us. So keep that in mind as we kind of go through the presentation. And then for a number, nobody picked like a negative number or a fraction or a decimal. It's because we're pretty much wired to go, well, 12 and 2 and 5. And so they know that as well. So again, it's a very predictable test. And like I said, the test writers know that. So keep it in line with strategy and tips and helping you guys on the ACT. Another one is just taking the test on your own terms, whether it's the ACT or the SAT. But for the ACT, there's a certain way to manage your tests and pacing yourself. You also need to know how you work. What's your personality like? How you study best? Is it early in the morning, late at night? Are you a good crammer or you're not a good crammer, and you need to space it out. Knowing that is going to help you, especially when you prepare for an exam like this. I don't recommend cramming for an SAT the week before, or the ACT. It's not going to help you get a really higher score. You need really some time with it. At the same time, too, you can learn to manage your tests. And what I mean by that, for example, questions come in 3 flavors. They're easy, medium, or difficult. Whether you know it or not, for example, in the math, here's a showing of what the math looks like. Number 1, 2, and 3 are easy. 58, 59, and 60 are difficult. And you go, well, so what, Anthony? Well, if you have 60 questions in 60 minutes, what goes through your head? Chat it in if you can. 60 questions, 60 minutes. What might go through your head?
One per
60
minute.
questions in 60 minutes.
1 per minute. You're in a rush. You can't finish
One per
them all.
minute. Yeah, well, I mean, most people think 1 per minute so I could finish the test. We're all taught to try to finish an exam. Well, on an ACT, sometimes it's not in your best interest to attempt all the questions, because if you're not a great math student, and again, this is knowing yourself, sometimes what they do, people rush and they go through the easy ones faster than a minute, and then they spend all their time on the medium hard ones and the difficult ones where they get them wrong anyway. Well, it's more about accuracy for you, okay? So slowing down again, it depends on what type of student you are, whether you need to slow down or not, and I don't know because I haven't seen your exams, but it's really individualized. So I've had some math students where we actually only do the first 45, and then the last ones, they don't even attempt. They spend the first 45 and making sure once they hit 45, they start all over, making sure they get them all right, and they work on the accuracy. And so they do the ones we talk about now. Some other students who are really good math students, they might attempt them all. So really, it's important to manage your exam, and it's going to be different for every one of you on this workshop tonight, and you need to know that. And you need to approach it that way. Don't think I'm going to do what Johnny does if he does it one way, because you're a different tester and you have different strengths and weaknesses. Just the same as you might find geometry easy and algebra hard, and Johnny is the reverse. So you might actually skip some of the questions that you find hard and actually do the other ones instead. So really managing your test becomes really important, and that's a big strategy. Rob, you can forget about this poll because I already skipped on it. But here's another example of taking a test and managing it well, is using a technique or a strategy called process elimination. Well, does anyone know the capital of Malawi offhand? If you do, chat it in there. And if you don't, well, the good news about an ACT, it's multiple choice. So you're really going to have answer choices listed. And so when you have answer choices listed, if you can narrow those down, you can increase the chances of you getting it correct. So if you didn't know it, and now I throw out these A, B, C, D's, or E, now take a pick and guess what you think it is. Well, now we could do process elimination. Well, it's probably not. Oh, it's probably not A. It's probably not B. Oh, look, we found the answer at E. Now the ACT is harder than this question. But the point is, using some types of strategies like elimination help you get to the answer. And that makes you, it actually decreases your anxiety. So elimination is another strategy. Now, my students, we go through weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks of practicing this. It just doesn't happen overnight that you know how to eliminate. And it's, like I said, harder than this type of question. But the point is, even using something like this can help you on a test like an ACT. And then let's talk about guessing. So if you had 1, 2, and 3 on an ACT, I'd love to see you guys chatting in there. What would you do if it was an ACT on number 1, 2? Tell me which ones you would guess on. 1, 2, or 3, or all of them, or 2 and 3. Just chat it in there. How many of you would you guess? And if you would guess, which one would you guess on an ACT? Now, you don't know the question here. So I don't know, you don't know what I'm saying. What is the capital of whatever? You don't even know the question. But if you were down to 1 and down to 4, only eliminate 1 in number 1, would you guess? And what would you do in number 2, and what would you do in number 3?
You're guessing on all of them is the most common answer. Some people say just
Okay.
3, but most people say all or all 3.
Okay, perfect. So again, this is understanding what test you're taking. If you're taking an ACT, you actually don't lose any points for getting one wrong. You should always guess on those. On an SAT, it's a different story because you lose actually points for getting one wrong. So understanding which test you're taking. So on an ACT, you get a point for getting it right. You lose nothing for getting it wrong. So you should never leave anything blank on an ACT. So if you've taken one before and you left something blank, you're making an error because you're losing the opportunity to gain some points. So kind of going back to where we were here is, even if you only attempted the first 45 and made sure you got most of those right because those are easy and medium, you can guess on the last 15 and you still have chances of getting them right, but you're not wasting all that time because they're so hard. And what happens if you do try to attempt those, you make careless errors on the easy and medium ones, and you don't want to do that. So that's kind of in some guessing things. Make sure you place a line through your answer choices in the booklet. Be aggressive. Never leave something blank. If you only have a minute left, just start bubbling. You know, don't flip a coin. It takes too long. So have a letter of the day. So when in doubt, I go in with the test on an ACT with A because that's my name. Anthony starts with an A. If A is crossed out, I go to B because it's closest to A. So that's kind of understanding and managing the test. So that's really, really important. So here's a sample problem. Rob, if you want to do a quick poll, so here's an example of an ACT problem. So Rob's going to poll you to see, you know, what you guys think the answer is, and then I'm going to walk you through it about solving it and using some of the strategies I talked about already.
Once we get to 50% participation, I'll read the most popular answer.
All right, perfect.
Don't mess up. All right. Our winner with 63% is 10 squared minus 5 squared pi, B.
Perfect. But only 60-some%. So let's walk through it, and I want you kind of to take you through the mindset of what I've been talking about. Now, a lot of you got it right, which is great, but just other things to kind of take note is, one is sometimes you have to rephrase a question, and we teach people how to do that at Princeton Review because sometimes they're not as straightforward. And number two is, okay, so we're rephrasing it is, it's basically find the area of a square minus the area of a circle. So now you need to understand, again, what content's on the test. So you need to know area of a square and area of a circle. And then we label the problem. And once we label the problem, it just fits so nicely. Now, one thing about an ACT is you don't always have to solve for the answer. In this case here, it's a number 40 because it looks complicated, but it's really not complicated. If you actually have the formulas down, which is s squared, which is side squared area of the square, you know that's going to be 10 squared. So anything that doesn't have 10 squared, you can actually cross out. So right away, and this is process elimination, you get rid of C, D, and E off the bat. You're left with a 50-50 choice just because it wasn't in the proper format. And now you just have pi r squared, and the only thing left here is B. So sometimes you're able to do a question that might seem hard in a matter of seconds because you know what you're looking for. Now, some of you might got it right, but you might have solved it, and it might have taken you too long. Remember, there's time pressure on this test as well. So knowing what you're up against and whether you should solve it or not, or how you can go about solving it, plays a role. We'll skip this one just because of time. So let's do another content. I'm going to do a content quiz here. So Rob, if you want to do a poll on this question.
Our winner with 72% is neither. 30% say even.
All right, let's do another poll. Now number, is it positive, negative, neither, or D or E? I'm glad nobody's picking D or E. That means you're engaged, you're paying attention. I love it.
This one, neither, is the clear winner with 92%.
Okay, so here's an example of some content that might be tested, but they wouldn't test and just come out and straight and say what the number 0 is. They would put it in a problem, like how many distinct even integers are the number 204, 842, blah, 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 whatever. So, but if you don't know that 0 is even, and most of you did not, you're going to get a question wrong. And this is what I talk about, saying like there's no calculus on it. Oh, the content on it is actually not that difficult. It's just sometimes it's stuff we've forgotten, and the test writers know that, and so they put it on there. And so if you're in calculus now and you're trying to take the ACT, you might struggle on the math, not because you're not good at math, but you're so well past the math that's being tested. So it's really important to know the content that's being tested, and you need a review of that content. That's something we do in our classes at Princeton Review. We teach you that content, and then we teach it to a way that you can apply it to the test. But if you don't know that, you're going to get some wrong. So, what's really being tested on the math side, this is kind of some of the stuff that's going to be tested. So if you don't know, like 1 is not a prime number, you're going to get 1 wrong. So some of the tips, remember I had that slide that had the 5 things. Well, the first one, the C, was content. The second one was strategy. This is the third one, technique. You need step-by-step methods for solving specific problems. There's a game plan you need to put in place. And these methods are, if anybody plays a sport, I like to play soccer or basketball, so if I'm playing basketball, you don't even think about it, you just do it. But there's a method for shooting a free throw, and it's, planting my feet down, I bend my knees, I bounce the ball 3 times. It's kind of this routine. And then when I shoot the ball, I hold my left hand to guide it. I shoot with my right hand, my wrist follows through. That's a technique. It's step-by-step things that I do. So if you do anything, there's these techniques that you use. You have to apply the same process to the ACT, and if you don't, you might struggle. So let's kind of take a look at one. So here's an example of a problem that I'm going to show you a technique on. But let's do a really quick poll to see if we can get an answer for it. And then I'll show you how to solve it using two of my techniques for math. And I'm doing math problems now because it comes first in my slides, but sometimes it's easier to show some of the things that I'm talking about. Doing a reading comprehension passage is a little bit harder because it takes a little bit longer, and I don't have that per se.
I'll give you guys another 5 seconds here. It's too close to call. 43% say B, n plus 4. 35% say E, n plus 20.
Okay, so we have a wide range, okay? So some of you got it right, some of you got it wrong. But let me walk you through how we would do something from a Princeton U perspective and using the technique of looking at this problem. Now, one of the first things we need to do is we need to recognize what type of problem it is. And at Princeton U, or my students, when they see math, they start to kind of categorize the problem. This one's actually a 2-pronged problem because it's an average problem, and it's also something we call a plug-in problem. So it's kind of this dual problem. So we're going to use 2 techniques here. So let's look at it from a average and plug-in problem. So we teach at Princeton U this what we call an average wheel. So I have my students draw this wheel. At the top of the wheel is this total. On the bottom left is the number of things, and on the bottom right is the average. The line across between the top and the bottom is the division, and then when you do the number and the average, when you go across, it's a multiplication sign. So this is what we call an average wheel. So when you see an average problem like this, drawing an average wheel, now you might go, well, this takes too long, Anthony, I can get the right answer. Well, when you get to number 55 or 60 and it's an average problem, doing an average wheel is going to make a big difference. The other part of the problem, it's called a plug-in. Well, I hate dealing with Y's and T's and S's and N's in this case, or M's, or whatever it may be. So what we do is we actually pick a number. I pick a really small number. I'm not going to pick 425. You can pick any number you want, but I want to make the math easy. So I'm going to pick a small number. So plugging in and using the average wheel. These are 2 techniques we can use on the ACT. So here we go. So I'm going to make n 8. So when I do that, I fill in my average wheel here. And when I do that, there's 4 tests. So we're going to do an average wheel for the first 4 tests. There are 4 things. The total is 32 because we made the n, which was the average, 8. So we do multiply 4 times 8. The total is 32. Now, we need to make another average wheel because on the 5th test, she exceeds her previous average by 20 points. So I'm going to make another average wheel. And I'm going to go from 4 things to 5 things. So you just see that right there. Now she exceeds by 20 points. Okay, now remember we had the 8 as well in there. On her, Amy received an average score of N. Her average score was 8. So on her fifth test, she exceeds her previous average by 20. So we got to add the 8 and the 20 together to get 28. And that's where my plus 28 comes in. So my new total is 60. So now all I need to do is find the average things. And in my average wheel, I do divide the top by the bottom, and I'm going to get 12. And then I have to plug in N is 8 into all my answer choices, and I'm looking for 12. So that 12 is my target after I plugged in, and I find B as my answer. Now, this might go, boy, that took a long time. But when you get good at these techniques, just imagine if you do a sport now. Like, I don't think about shooting a free throw, I just do it. Or if you hit a tennis ball, you don't think how I hold my racket and how I swing the racket. You just do it. And that's what you have to do with something like this, is you got to practice it so it becomes second nature. Okay. So that's a technique of using plugging in and using the average wheel. Okay. Let's, just because of time, I'm going to skip this problem. Actually, no, let's do this one. Since I have a little time. I've got another 10 minutes, 15 minutes or so. So let's look at number 45 here. So it's a little bit harder than the one before. So all my guys that got the answer correct last time, let's see how you do on this problem.
Once I launch this poll, you won't be able to see the question because it was too long. So if everyone can just look at the question, I'll give you 1 minute and then I'll launch the poll. All right, here we go. Another close race between 18 and 22.
All right.
It's literally tied. Oh, 22 pulls ahead. Our winner is 22 with 42%.
Perfect. Well, great. Some of you guys you got your math down. So here's a problem where we don't know any ages here. Now, this is a type of plugin where we don't pick our own number. We actually use the answer choices. So again, here's another technique. And this technique we call plug in the answer choices. And because the answers are going in order, whether in this case they're going from higher to bigger to smaller, if we start at C and we plug in that number, okay, and again, I'm not going to take too much time on it just because of the time problem here, but this is another technique we would use, is we use the answer choices to plug in, and we plug in, if we plug in 18 here, and we go, let's see if this one works. So if you don't know what to do, using this answer choice thing can help you sometimes. So if Tom is 18, then let's go through the problem. So if Tom is 18, then Linda would be 9, and then Karen would be 13, and then Brian would be 39. So, okay, would that be my answer? Well, in a year, we'll be twice as old as Tom will be next year. So if Brian will be 40 next year, then Tom will be 19. He'll be twice as old. That doesn't work. Let me try another answer choice. So then I can cross those off because he was too small. Now I just try another number. So this is a technique where we use the answer choices. And so no matter where on the ACT you're taking, whether it's the science section, whether it's the English section, there are these types of techniques that you can use. I'm not going to do one here, but the point of it is you can use these techniques because they're step-by-step methods you use. So you've got to learn these methods. If you don't have these type of methods when you take an exam, you're going to struggle on the test. Okay. Um, Now, you might have some good techniques. Some of you were getting some questions right, so you might not change your approach. But if you're having a problem finishing the exam, then you might need to do that because maybe you're doing things the long way. And sometimes even that, when you're doing something the long way, that's going to hurt you. So you need to understand, do I have a time issue? And if you do, you might have to try a different technique. Here's some ACT tricks that they use a lot. Um, can anybody see any of the errors in these problems right here? These are some of the grammar tricks that they'll pull on people. If you see some, just type it in there. Again, knowing what the test writers are going to put on the exam or how they're going to trick you or what type of techniques you need to use to solve problems are going to help you quite a bit. If you just go into the ACT and just take it going, hey, I'm a smart kid, I should do fine, sometimes that's where people struggle or they don't get the score they want. Oh, that's not the score I wanted to get into the school that I wanted. UC Berkeley is not going to accept a 24 on the ACT. Oh no, I'm just not there.
A lot of answers about subject verb agreement, plural versus singular.
Yes, exactly. So, I mean, these are the types of tricks. So, only one of the juniors are. Well, only one is not are, and it's subject verb agreement. The senior class or everyone has, and they do this. They use a lot of rules that they check, whether it's collective nouns, tricky pronouns like anyone, anybody, nobody. So the use of singular versus plural. So they use these type of tricks. Again, this ties into understanding the content on the test, and when it's actually in a problem on the ACT, understanding how to use a technique to solve it and how to eliminate to solve and get to the answer choices. So I'm going to skip through this. So in terms of the English topics to focus on, here's 5 things you should definitely focus on when you're working on the English. These are the main topics: verbs, pronouns, apostrophes, transition, and concise. And what concise means is, when you're having too long of a sentence, it's real important to be more concise. And those are typically where your answers are going to be very concise with that. So again, that kind of touches on the topic on the English side. In the science, when you talk, again, because of time, I'm not spending a lot of time on each section, but when you're dealing with the science, most people score the lowest here on the science, but it's very coachable because you don't need a lot of science. And a lot of people who choose not to take the ACT, they go, well, I don't like science, so I don't want to take the ACT. But you don't really need the science knowledge. It's just reading science passages, and if you know what type of passages that they have, such as charts and graphs or experiments, and knowing what they're looking for, it makes the science passages a lot easier because it's not about the reading. It's about finding the answers and knowing how to find the answers. And so there's some strategy here. And again, I'll provide you with these slides. I know I'm going fast, but I'm trying to cut it off at in the next 5 minutes here. Again, for science, for example, you've got to spot and evaluate things and be able to do that. And you got to do it quickly. So you need to know, which passage, even from which passages you should do now versus which passages you should do later. You don't have to do the passage that's given to you first. My students, they do the small tables and graphs first, now, and they save the other things for later because they take too much time. Again, everything's worth the same. So why not do the easier stuff first? The same with the math side. You don't have to do the hard questions, number 59 and 60, especially if you're always getting those wrong. Make sure you get number 3 right and number 5 right. So you've got to work out of your own order, and that's part of managing the test again. And then personal order of difficulty. That's what POOD means. So the charts and the graphs are the easiest, then the experiments, and then last, the fighting scientists are usually the hardest part of the science section. So you should do those last. So again, This is technique and strategy, but again, I don't have time to kind of take you through some of that. And the essay, we're not going to do that. So moving on. So I told you 3 things to succeed on the test. Here's the 4th thing. So you had 3 things were content, strategy, technique. Here's the 4th thing, is you need practice with analysis. And triple P is just practice, 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 because practice makes perfect. You need to take many practice tests, not day after day. You need to take one, analyze what you did, what your strengths and weaknesses are, work on whether it's strategy or technique, then take another test to build up your endurance, to increase your confidence, build up your speed and accuracy. And then all along, while you're doing that, the more tests you take, you're going to lower your test anxiety. Really important. So again, taking multiple practice tests. If you go to princeu.com/events, you can do a couple things. One, you can find a practice ACT in one of a Princeton Review area, or you can actually take a practice ACT online with Princeton Review. The other thing we have is what we call a PRA, which is an SAT, a split SAT and ACT. So you can take that exam, and we could tell you which test you're better at, the SAT or the ACT. So if you go to princeu.com/events, I'd highly suggest taking a practice test if you've never done it before. So you at least have a baseline. Oh, I have a 21 on my ACT, and I want to go to Harvard. Well, 21 is not going to cut it. You're going to need some formal prep. So these are the 5 things that I mentioned you're going to need to succeed on the test. And if you have these 5 things, you're going to do pretty well on the test. The reason why, and I said this early on, is I get a lot of students who they do well in school, but they don't succeed on an SAT or an ACT, is because they usually don't have number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5. They just think, I do well in school, I'm going to ace this exam. And that's not the case, because maybe they don't know how to guess, eliminate, they don't have any techniques, they just do it like they would do it in math class, which sometimes takes too long. So with that said, a few more housekeeping and announcements. What I would recommend in terms of taking your ACT, if you're a junior now, you should probably at least sit for one ACT before the end of the year if you can. And if not, then in the fall, but you're waiting too long. If you're a sophomore now, I'd highly suggest prepping over the summer and taking the September or October ACT so you get it out of the way and you can focus on other things. And you typically, if you're a junior now, even a sophomore, you might take your subject exams. Those are specific in subject areas like chemistry and biology. You want to take that at the end of junior year when you're in that history class or that bio class. So even as a sophomore, you might do that as well. That's why a lot of people don't take the ACT or SAT in June, is they're doing their subject exams then. And senior year is typically used for backing up your tests, meaning that you need to retake it. So I would suggest that. If you have a test score or you take a practice ACT with Princeton or you have a practice ACT, you match it up against a school like this on a chart like this to see if you need additional help. Because if you're trying to go to a school that requires a 30+ ACT score and you're in the low 20s, you're going to need probably some formal prep. It's not going to take you 1 week or attending my workshop tonight and you're going to go up 10 points on the ACT. That just doesn't happen. So that in itself should help you plan out a timeline for prepping for your exam. If you need 1 point, you don't need a full summer maybe to kind of prep. So with that said, a couple more announcements. Again, Princeton Review, you can read about us, but what I wanted to get to here, I believe we run fantastic classes. We help students improve. You can read all about that. 2 announcements. One is there's a free college admissions e-newsletter. CollegeWise is our admissions division of the Princeton Review, and if you email me, I can get you on the CollegeWise e-newsletter. It's free, and it's going to have great information, such as what happens if I get waitlisted, or what should I do over the summer before so I can prepare for college, or what are some application tips, and they give you that, and it's all free. Parents, you can do that too. You can get on the newsletter. It doesn't have to be a student. So email me, and I'll put you on that free e-newsletter. And number 2 is if you think you need some prep, whether it's an ACT class, some tutoring, an online course, or whatever, we're offering anybody who attends the Zinch webinar a discount. So all you have to do is take one of these promo codes and use it online or when you call an advisor. Um, and again, we'll send a follow-up. We'll send these slides out so you will get these codes if you need those. So I definitely want to do that. And again, take a few free practice tests on our website if you want. So Rob, with that, I'm kind of going to leave that open to questions. And my information, again, here's my information on the board if you don't get to get your question in. So Rob, let's open it up to some questions for the last 15 minutes or so.
All right. First question. When you mentioned grammar areas to focus on, can you elaborate on what transitions mean? That was one of your areas to focus on.
There's things like transition words or transitions in a sentence, whether you have a semicolon, meaning that it goes with the same flow of the sentence, or a transition word like because or but changes the meaning of a sentence and things like that. So you've got transitions like that. But again, part of this is, if that's a great question, you should look it up. You guys should kind of find out more about it. Again, elaborating on this call, everything has been like 10 seconds or so. So for further elaboration, you know, go to princeu.com, look everything about an ACT, go to act.org. Go get a practice test, take one, and you'll see what I'm talking about.
Sounds
But
good.
that type of grammar is also on the SAT. So whether you're studying it for both, it'll help you on both sides of things.
I know there's basic formulas provided on the SAT. Is there a formula sheet for the ACT?
No, you're gonna learn some of the basic formulas. You'll need to know them, but they're not that difficult.
Is there calculus on the test?
No, I already said that. No
Can you remind
calculus.
us what POOD stands for?
Yeah, personal order of difficulty. And what that strategy is, if you're better at algebra than geometry, then do the algebra question first. Or as I said in the science section, I recommend doing the charts and graphs first because those are easier than the fighting scientist passages. So that's personal order of difficulty. Do the things that for you, and it might be, you know, don't go and compare with your friend because they might have a different personal order of difficulty. And that's what that means.
The essay is optional on the ACT. Does that mean we should take it or not take it, or does it not matter?
It would matter. It depends on where you want to go to school if you should take it or not. So I don't know that answer to that question. Um, if you don't know and you want to keep your options open, then I would take it.
Great. Can you tell us more about the Princeton Review practice test and how that works?
Yeah, you can do two things. You can take a practice test online, or you can find a test in your city or in your area and go and sit and have one proctored, because sometimes we go to different high schools, sometimes we have a practice test days. So if you just go to our website, take a look at it, you can sign up for one. And then after you get your results, you'll have a baseline score. Oh, you got a 22 or a 19, and then you can kind of compare to some of the schools you want to apply to, and that kind of gives you an idea of where you're at. And it doesn't go on your record. You get a report that breaks down your strengths and weaknesses in all the subject areas, how you did in grammar and how you did in the different types of passages and etc. So it's a great practice test, and it's free. You know, you're more than welcome to then tell me, hey, Anthony, I got this test score. What do you think? Or if you're in a, you know, if you live in Austin, you can talk to the Austin Princeton Review because they're there. I'm sure they're happy to have one of their advisors talk to you about it and determine if you need, you know, you're good, you need some prep, you need an online course, you might want a tutor in one area.
How does vocabulary on the ACT compare to vocabulary on the SAT?
Well, on the SAT, well, there's different question types. And again, that's understanding the test you're taking at hand. On an SAT, there's things called sentence completions um, where it's kind of a fill in the blank. And so vocabulary is a lot more um, pertinent. So in other words, SAT tests vocabulary. Not that ACT doesn't. When you're reading, they're pretty much reading passages. So, just knowing what things mean help, but SAT actually has specific questions that you need vocabulary on. So in SAT prep, we even give our kids words to study. So
Great. People say when in doubt, choose letter C. Is that true?
no, when in doubt, well, how about if C's crossed off? Then what do you do? Um, you you can become a very good guesser, and you can also use common sense for finding some answers out. On SAT, even easier to eliminate answer choices based on common sense and what would never be an answer choice. A little bit harder on the ACT, but no, that's not true. Um, so again, I go in with letter of the day. Mine is A. So if I'm unsure, I went through all my things, I would just pick A. That's how I do it. But if you C can be your letter of the day, that doesn't matter.
Are the most difficult questions always going to be at the end of the section?
Yes, it goes in order of difficulty. There's some caveats to that, but in general, again, read up on the test and know where all the easy questions are. But like I said, like I showed you in the math, it kind of follows along that flow. Um, the SAT is very similar in that there's only 8 questions in one section. So the first third are easy, the second third. So again, what I will tell you is go back and learn all about that test. So and that's going to help you.
Are there any time strategies you have for the reading section when it comes to how fast you should read the passage? Should you read the answer, the questions rather before the passage? Any thoughts on that?
Great question. There's more to it based on um, how you read and what kind of reader you are and that type of stuff. So what I can say is it's not so much about reading as opposed to, looking at the questions and how to find the answers. So they're like open book tests, and really the most important thing is just going back to the passage to get the answers and stuff. So you just got to be able to find those. So it's less about reading the full passage. That's what I will say. But that's where people need technique.
Would an easier problem on the math section, like number 3, give the same amount of credit as number 60? A hard question.
Yes, exactly. That's why I'm saying it's all worth the same. So why not do number 3 and get it right? The problem is people rush and they get number 3 wrong, and then they spend 5 minutes on number 60 and still get that wrong. I'd rather you forget doing number 60, just guess on it, and make sure you get number 3 right, number 6 right, number 8 right. And that's the key to a test like this, is doing it that way. Unless you're that person trying to get a 36 and you have a 34 already, well then, you're not in that kind of game. It's very different for you.
Is there any tips you have for students to manage their time better if they find themselves running out of time?
Well, if there's hardly any time left, then it's bubble, bubble, bubble. Just practice bubbling. You got to just bubble and get an answer down. That's really important. So if you're running out of time, again, you have to know yourself. All this testing is like time prep. You just got to know what keeps you. You have to keep yourself calm. What I always say is don't fall into the ceiling tile theory where you're looking up at the ceiling or the tile and you get stuck. You always got to keep moving, and just the minute you get flustered, you got to calm yourself back down and you got to keep going. There's always something you can do, whether it's bubbling an answer. You should never finish a section and put your pencil down and you're done. You should always go back and make sure you have some of the right answers, because sometimes carelessness, we make a lot of them. Are you one of those students who make a lot of careless errors? You need to know that about yourself, and if you are, then you need to double check your work. So when you're running out of time, you got to keep yourself calm, make sure an answer is filled out for everything, and then the ones you had some questions on, you maybe go and you you do those. Um, if you make a lot of careless errors, I would highly recommend making sure you go back to like 1 through 20 and making sure those are right.
How many times should we take the ACT or SAT?
Well, I would suggest one. I would say one. And the reason I would say one is you could take a practice test with me for free and see what you score. You don't need to really take the ACT. And then once you have your score with a practice from Princeton Review, let's say you have a 20 and you need a 26, well, there's no point in going and taking the ACT for real. You're 6 points away, which is huge. So you should do everything you can to be able to get that 26, which will require probably all summer long of doing work and prep. So you go in then in September, October, take it, and you get your 26, and you're done. So you go for once, but if you have it done right, then maybe you take it a second time at most. So I would say at most 2 times.
Here's a
And
hypothetical
then
for you.
touching back on that reading question, I just pulled up. Rob, I pulled up a slide about somebody asked about that, reading strategies and stuff like that. So, I just pulled this up for that person who had asked that question, just so they can kind of see the different passages. And then in the red here are some strategies, meaning that map the questions are kind of like I said, you got to use the questions because those are, and then go back to the passages. And then again, picking your order. There are certain questions that are easier to answer or find. Do those. But again, that takes practice. You won't know it until you do more ACT practice to find out what are the ones that are easier to answer. But again, that's understanding the test.
Hypothetical, if I get an answer of 4.5 on the math section and the closest answer choices are 4 and 5, what should I pick?
Well, it depends on how much time is left on the clock, because you might have to bubble it. It depends on what numbered question it was. It depends on how long did it take you to get 4.5. If it was 5 minutes and it was a number 55 and you're not a great math student, I would be like, what the heck are you, like, forget that problem. Just bubble something in, your letter of the day, and move on. If you're a really bright kid and you got all those questions up to 55 right, then redo the problem because you're bright and you probably get 4 or 5 in your next chance. So maybe you made an error. So there's a lot of factors that go into it. You can't just ask me that. You can. You just did. Ask me that question, and I have an answer for you. There's always more to it based on who you are, how your approach of the test should be, because everything is going to be individualized. But in all things being equal, whatever your letter of the day is.
All right. Any tips for maintaining a calm, focused attitude throughout the ACT?
Well, part of it is just being prepared. So, when I tutor kids, they do 5 or 6 full-length exams under proctored conditions before they go into the ACT. So, yes, they're totally bored because they've done so many with me. But when they get in on test day, they go, this is old, this is old hat. I've seen it before, and you're not as stressed. So the anxiety level is a lot lower. The first time they did one with me, though, the first practice test, the anxiety level was high. So that in itself, to keep your anxiety level lower, is to just, the more familiar with something, probably the lower the anxiety will be. Again, know yourself. And if you tend to get very anxious, well, how do you kind of get rid of some of that anxiousness? And for most people, it's just being familiar with something. So what I would suggest is it's not on test day. It's the weeks and months preceding test day that's going to do that for you on test day. So that's what I would suggest is, make sure you're planned and properly prepped, and that won't happen on test day.
Great. Thanks, Anthony. And thanks, everyone, for all the great questions. We had just under 200 people here asking lots of questions. So if we did not get to answer your question, it wasn't because it was a bad question or I don't like you. It was just because we didn't have enough time. But we will send out a recording of this webinar, as well as the slides and some more information from Anthony and Princeton Review you can reach out to him or any of the Princeton Review test taking experts for any questions that you still have. Anthony, anything else to close out tonight?
No, and those were great questions. If you have some follow-ups, reach out to me, give me a call. As Rob said, we'll send you the slides and some follow-up information.
Great. Thanks,
Good luck.
everyone. Have a good night.